All right, Wednesday, September 17th, 2025. My name is John Michael Chambers, and welcome back to the GFR, the Global Financial Reset, Surviving and Thriving the Transition. I recently had a discussion with SG and On concerning the critical issues about the reset, and I will air that discussion in this very broadcast in just a bit. Also joining us live in just a moment is Mr. Ed Dow, formerly with BlackRock. Now, both gold and silver are rising in value, real value. When the Fed lowers rates, we may expect to see a potential catapult in the shiny metals. Gold will play a major role in securing the US dollar again and the new stable coin digital currency, as I understand, in the QFS that we may be moving towards. So I absolutely encourage those with investable assets, either inside or outside of an IRA, or 401k, qualified money, etc., to buy gold, buy silver, buy now. It is not too late. But it is a buyer beware situation for a host of reasons. I'll get to that later. Avoid the dangers by visiting free educational modules at wealthcoachuniversity.com and click jmcgenesismetals.com and ask for Bill Armour that you see on the screen and tell him I sent you for VIP expert service and trusted advice. Gold sitting just under 3,700 today, silver sitting just under 43, and most analysts and experts in the metals arena pretty much line up that we are poised for continued growth. All right, so here's a disclaimer for this broadcast and all GFR shows. I am not giving any specific individual investment advice on this program. This is for educational purposes only. I bring aboard a variety of guests to the GFR from all walks of life in the economic arena. While many of my guests, and myself included, have done the research, as many of you have too, it is my belief that only President Donald Trump and a handful of pertinent others in his circles knows exactly what the new system we are in fact moving into will be, how and when it will play out. One thing we do know is great change is now taking place. And having said that, I encourage you to continue to do your own research and follow the gentleman you see on the screen, President Donald J. Trump. All right, I'm real happy to have Ed Dow here. Ed Dow has worked on Wall Street most of his career, spanning both credit markets and equity markets. Some of the firms he worked for include HSBC, Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, Independence Investments, and most notably BlackRock, as a portfolio manager where he managed a $14 billion growth equity portfolio for 10 years. Currently, he is a consultant to Symphonic Capital and is in the process of raising capital, which we're going to talk about, to start a hedge fund with Symphonic. He has lived through the dot-com fraud, the GFC real estate bank fraud, and is now presenting his investment thesis on pharma, big pharma fraud, and we're going to jump right into that. Ed is currently a founding partner with Finance Technologies, a global macro alternative investment firm. I love alternative investments. There's something right about that. It's providing you do your due diligence. He's worked on Wall Street most of his career, spanning both credit markets and equity markets. Some of the firms, again, that he worked for are quite notable, as I've just mentioned. And so we're going to jump into some of the economic numbers, some of the things that are going on, and what Ed's forecast in his crystal ball is in terms of where equity, bond, and real estate markets might be heading. Noteworthy here, those that want to learn a little bit more about Ed, I interviewed Ed some months ago in Conversations of Consequence, very different platform than this. And it's a show where I feature the important voices of our time. You can go to my website, into the archives, and view that broadcast. Please welcome Ed Dow. Thanks for being here, Ed.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me. Listen, one correction. I'm not, Symphonic was my prior gig. I'm with Finance Technologies, my own firm. Just want to make that clear. So anyways, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for that correction. I must have surfaced a former introduction bio. We'll get that corrected, and thanks for clearing that up. And thanks for being here. Before we weigh in, have you weigh in on various aspects, both dangers and the opportunities that you may see looming here in this sort of uncertain time. even though markets are all-time highs, we're going to jump into that in a moment. But before we do, let's talk about COVID-related issues. You are also, we can put it up on the screen, the author of Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths, which of course can be found on Amazon.com. Talk with us, Ed, about this book. What will the reader glean from this body of work?
Well, the book came out at the end of 2022, and it just showed that there was a marriage of two things: a lot of local news reports of people who suddenly died who were young, under the age of 45, usually athletic deaths or deaths in their sleeps. We didn't say in the book that what the cause was. It usually was not determined at the time of the publishing of the article, but we just wanted to note that there were usually not that many kinds of sudden deaths of young people going on prior to 2021. And then within the book, we look at what is a deep dive analysis of the metadata, the CDC, all-cause mortality in the U.S. We looked at disabilities in the U.S. and we looked at other countries. And we determined that there was something very wrong going on in 21 and 22. We updated the book in 23, and it's 2025, and the disaster continues. At the publishing of this book, it was 3 million excess disabilities above the trend line. Currently, there's 6 million in the U.S. above prior to the trend line of 2015 to 2019. And the good news is the uptake of the boosters is way down. So excess deaths hit an all-time high in the U.S. of 32% above trend line in 2021 and have been trending down. But the long-term excess death looks to be 5 to 10%. Swiss Re, which is an insurance company, said similar things in their reports. So the vaccine continues to do its damage slowly and marching through the ranks of the 70% of people who took it. It's definitely now become apparent to many that the science is now following up what we discovered years ago, that there was contamination of DNA in the batches that gets into the DNA, which they said didn't, and that's causing turbo cancers, neurological issues, heart attacks, kidney failure, liver disease, you name it. This thing is a disaster, and hopefully Bobby Kennedy exposes this. I think there's slowly starting to become consensus within the administration. I know Donald Trump was a very big fan of his vaccines and Operation Warp Speed, but about 3 weeks ago, he did put out a tweet asking the question, maybe it wasn't so great because he was told by Pfizer it was great, and he's now questioning that. So the good news is we might get some sort of national reconciliation or awareness of what's going on. But, you know, this is one of the greatest poisonings that the globe has ever seen. You know, I'm a little disheartened that the mainstream media never talks about it. It's still kind of taboo, and it's not really talked about. Even, you know, people who know someone who died of it don't want to talk about it. It's kind of this, like, you know, disgusting, quiet shame that's going on. Kind of like when I was growing up, and my grandparents used to whisper the word "he has cancer." I'm sure you remember that, John, back in the day. Cancer was shameful. I guess taking the COVID vaccine and dying from it shameful as well.
Well, you know, it's a level of denial that's taken place because of the big scam and lie that was told to everyone in this country and everyone all over the world. And I guess so from their perspective, there's a bit of a shame or whatever the case may be. But it's a tragedy, as you've mentioned. So I remember interviewing and talking with Dr. Judy Mikovits and Dr. Terry Tempany and Christiane Northrup, Dr. Christiane Northrup, and others back on the onset of this when it occurred, when Trump brought Birx and Fauci out as bookends to expose them, in my opinion. But here we are. Those doctors forecast the great concerns they had about deaths escalating down the line, and you've just reported some numbers that are horrific. They're not just numbers. These are people's lives. You may have mentioned it. I just want some clarification. Will those that took the boosters after the shots, you know, the last round of shots that people took, can we still expect some escalating medical conditions in those that survive and more deaths from this?
Well, here's the thing that's concerning. So the booster uptake really started to slide after 2022. So that's good news, right? While the disabilities are continuing to rise, and they accelerated in the, we in May, June, July, we added another million disabled, and it's disheartening to see the trend line continuing to grow up and to the right. So this damage continues to kind of slowly wind through the population. It's becoming harder and harder to pinpoint it to the vaccine because some of these shots were taken years ago, but it's slowly doing damage and shortening lifespans, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you touched briefly on sort of the legal aspect or the approach the administration's taking. You're absolutely right in observing President Trump's most recent twist and take on what is happening. Certainly, RFK Jr. has been very, very busy. Spoken with some of the doctors, and they're quite pleased with some of its efforts, and maybe not so pleased with other efforts. And I just say something as big as Big Pharma and NIH and CDC and so forth, and characters such as Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci. This structure takes time to unwind some of these things, in my opinion. But some of the things I hear, and I'm curious what your take is on it, that they're looking to cease commercial advertisement as they did decades ago on tobacco. Now with any of the pharmaceutical drugs they're chronically pushing. Do you think, in your opinion, that will actually come to be? And if it does, it also has a big impact on legacy media because that's where they get a large portion of their funding. What do you think about all that?
That was great news. Obviously, this needs to be done, and it would blow a budget hole wide open in the independent or the old mainstream media, and they'd have to figure out new sources of funding or downsize, or maybe start telling the truth, one or the other. Who knows? This is certainly good news. Most countries don't do this except us in New Zealand, I believe, and if you look at these advertisements, they're just ridiculous. Long screeds of side effects read so fast that they boggle the mind. And look, honestly, I don't think anybody watches an ad on TV and goes and runs to their doctor and says, "Give me that." They go to the doctor with something. The doctor gives them what they think might help. Obviously, we are over medicalized in this country. The ads are basically payoff to not criticize big pharma or ever report any ill effects of what they're doing. So it's more of a payoff, and I think we need to end the payoff.
Yeah, well said. The payoff. I like that. That's a good soundbite, and it really speaks. It feels mafia-ish to me. Strategy for sure. But listen, it's good news there, as you stated. And there's so many other things that RFK Jr. is doing besides removing dyes and artificial things and so forth from various different things that we eat and drink. But I think there's a lot more to come. We also have to realize it's only been 9 months, 10 months that this administration's taken over, and we're certainly moving in the right direction. I want to shift gears to something very important. There's plenty of evidence that the Federal Reserve Chairman Powell and President Donald Trump have a different desired trajectory for the U.S. economy. At least that's evident to me. What's your take on this, and any updates or forecasts you may have concerning the interest rate cycle? And explain, come down the totem pole a bit, explain the basics for the average person so they understand what that means to their life and inflation and performance of markets, the interest rate issue. And again, Trump and Powell are, Trump calls him too late Powell. What's your take on the interest rate situation? Because it's a big deal.
Well, we got to remember we had 0% interest rates for basically 14 years after the great financial crisis. And what did that do? That basically inflated financial assets, real estate and stocks, and the rich got richer and the middle class shrank. Then COVID came along, and COVID was essentially a war. They printed unprecedented amounts of money, and the government borrowed that money and spent it. And that finally created real world inflation outside of financial assets and really hurt the middle class. And the Federal Reserve, after that fiasco, decided to raise interest rates to choke off inflation, which they called transitory. So we went from 0% interest rates to 5.5% in about a 12-month time frame, one of the fastest, most violent interest rate raises ever. And that had the effect of causing bank balance sheets to go upside down. There were a bunch of bank failures in 2023. The Fed came in and plugged a hole there and lent banks money against those money good assets held in their long-term maturity accounts. But then we should have had a recession at the end of 23, beginning of 24. But the Biden administration decided that it was in their wisdom to run crisis level deficits of 8% and hire unprecedented amounts of government workers and import 20 million illegals, and that juiced the economy going into the 2024 election and kept us from going into a recession. We've never seen in the history of the U.S. 20 million illegal immigrants coming so fast with the aid of the U.S. government getting funds directly in the NGO community. We figured that there was about 500 billion to 1.5 trillion in government aid that's been given to these people. And it's fraud and theft, in my humble opinion. Also, during this period, during the 2024 election and part of 23, Biden's BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, either was absolutely incompetent or made up the numbers. They overstated jobs by what we just found out recently, 911,000. I was saying this in November, December of last year, that they were overstating jobs by 1.25 million. And lo and behold, the most recent jobs reports are starting to unwind. And unfortunately, the Fed has been under the belief the economy was better than it is, so they've kept interest rates too high for too long. And we're seeing what I perceive to be one of the greatest policy errors ever in the history of the Fed. And that'll result in a collapse of economic activity's already collapsed. We're just waiting for the financial markets to collapse. We're starting to see some troubling signs from Tricolor Auto, which was a subprime auto lender that blew up, that was lending to illegal immigrants. That's going to have reverberations in the banking system that'll slowly cascade. And we're just waiting for the stock market to peak out. People got to remember, the stock market is not the economy, and sometimes it's late to the party in figuring this out. In 2007, the economy was already rolling over quite nicely. In 2007, the housing bubble had already popped, and the stock market didn't peak until November of 2007. And then we quickly had the 2008 debacle. I think we're poised. Unfortunately, we have a stock market bubble like the dot-com bubble with this AI bubble, and we have a housing market crisis, which we've outlined in our research reports we wrote earlier this year, and we sell on our website at financetechnologies.com. Housing starts today were abysmal. They're rolling over. No one can afford a home. The variance between homes for sale and homes sold has never been greater. And Donald Trump is inheriting a turd of an economy. And, I know they can't go around saying the economy isn't good, but they're going to own it if they keep saying how great the economy is, because it's not great. And this is going to be a shock to the system once the financial asset market's correct. And they're going to. Anybody and everybody that I know is just waiting for it to happen. These are people in the know. The general public seems to think everything's hunky-dory in the stock market. But the general consumer, the general middle-class person is still suffering greatly and mightily. Donald Trump is making an attempt with these trade deals to restructure the economy. But that takes time and doesn't happen overnight. These trade deals aren't even ratified yet in their countries. The EU deal hasn't been passed by Parliament. The Parliament in Japan hasn't passed their deal. So a lot of excitement, a lot of deals getting announced, but nothing's really going to happen for years. So this is going to take time.
Well said. Boy, you unpacked a lot there. Thanks a lot. Very insightful and very troubling. And I'm glad you assigned cause to the problem, and that's the auto pen presidency of 4 years that Donald Trump has now inherited. And I'm glad you gave the hard truth that some of this is going to take some time, just like we talked about a moment ago with dismantling the entire big pharma structure, aspects of those agencies, the CDC and so forth. Let's talk briefly, inspired a few questions here. It seems like with President Trump's strategy is, of course, drill baby drill, removing restrictions and taking care of business here. He's stated trillions of dollars from Saudi Arabia and other countries, pledges over the next several years to bring that capital here, to manufacture here, and so forth. Then, of course, there's the tariffs, which are bringing in billions of dollars. But all this takes time, is basically the narrative. The interest rates, they've got to come down. You would agree, correct?
Well, they're coming down not because things are good. They're coming down because things are bad. And the Fed has made a policy error by keeping interest rates too high for too long. They seem to have mistakenly believed the jobs market was better than it was. So there's the jobs market and the spending by the Biden administration gave the illusion the economy was better than it was. And the Federal Reserve seems to have bought that illusion, and they've kept real interest rates at 1.5% to 2%, which is too high. Real interest rates need to be below zero. And so, we need interest rates to go lower, but they won't until the Fed sees evidence, and by then it'll be too late. And as they start cutting, and you cut interest rates into a declining, GDP growth environment with declining stock market, it doesn't save it. We did not save the stock market. It's too late. And so the effects of the Federal Reserve new regime change of lowering interest rates won't be, this 25 basis point rate cut, which should have been 50, by the way. They cut 25 today. Should have been 50. This was a thumb in Donald Trump's eye. This 25 basis point rate cut won't be felt in the economy until 18 months from now. So there's a delay. Most people don't know this, between Fed monetary policy and then the real economy. When they jacked the economy with all that free money and then lowered interest rates to zero, inflation didn't hit until 18 months later. I mean, it didn't start appearing until the end of 2021. So that's the problem. They're too late, and we're going to get a recession. It'll be deep, and then hopefully by then President Trump's policies will be taking us out on the other side. It was funny. Jerome Powell said today, no one knows where the economy is going to be in 3 years. And on Twitter, I quote tweeted that and said, I'll take a stab. We'll be in the first year of a recovery after coming out of a deep recession. I mean, this is ridiculous. They don't know where the economy's going.
Yeah, exactly. They got a couple of hundred board of governors, very important people with $3 billion worth of real estate and buildings, which Trump was not too happy about. You've got all that. And essentially, what do? They raise and lower interest rates. They increase or decrease the money supply, and they've done a really bad job at it. Never mind the gazillions of dollars pumped into the system, devaluing our currency. But folks that are listening to Ed, it's very important. You're partying on the deck of the Titanic, to use the expression. We're all excited that the Dow's at all-time highs, and the S&P and the Nasdaq. The Dow's at 46,000 or whatever the number is. But Ed's just explained the mechanics and the timelines of the various key elements of what's in store. So prepare. I want to shift gears, if we can, Ed, and talk briefly about the banks. Spoke with an economist recently, and I think this is somewhat widely known. For all intents and purposes, the FDIC is grossly underinsured on the deposits that are at the banks, and that's a kind statement. It was reported recently that nearly 80 branches of some of the main big banks have closed in just the past 7 weeks. What are your concerns about the balance sheet of the central bank system as it relates to the policies of Powell? Is there a concern there?
Well, they took care of the duration problem that they caused in the interest rate hike cycle of 21 and 22. If you remember, they raised interest rates from 0 to 5.5%, and that torpedoed a lot of bond portfolios of the banks, because most people don't understand this, but when interest rates rise, bond prices go down. So banks had, even relatively safe securities like treasuries. If you had a 10-year treasury on your balance sheet in the bank, you lost 20, 30% when interest rates went from 0 to 5.5%. So the Fed bailed out the banks on that, gave them loans, and as the interest rate cycle goes lower, those safe securities should appreciate again. So the economic cycle will take care of that part of the problem. The part of the problem that the Fed is not going to lend money on or take onto their balance sheet are bad loans. And there's a lot of bad credit out there, commercial real estate. They've been extending and pretending. There's a lot of bad loans made to private credit people. There's a lot of bad consumer loans. There's a lot of bad mortgage loans that are starting to sour. So there's going to be a credit cycle. And I expect there'll be some consolidation of some of the regional banks in this cycle, and the big will get bigger. There'll be shotgun marriages, and like there always is. I mean, during the S&L crisis, same thing happened. The big swallowed the small. The great financial crisis was a lot scarier because the system was, at risk. And we're hopeful the system isn't at risk this time, and it's just a deep recession, and we get through it, and we get a recovery on the other side.
Yeah, so interest rates have an inverse relationship to the yields on bonds. So what you're saying, if interest rates rise, bond yields drop. Is that correct?
No, bond prices. Bond prices.
Bond prices.
So
okay.
Yeah. So if you buy a bond, a lot of these banks bought bonds in the 14 years. You buy a 10-year Treasury at 2%, right? So you have that on your books, and then when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates from 0 to 5.5%, the 10-year is now worth 5.5%, but that means the price has to go down to get that yield. So on paper, they took on paper losses. They weren't real losses. And that's why people were starting to get scared about the banks. Big losses on their books, but not realized losses, just book losses.
So you stated before
that'll reverse as interest rates come down.
Yes, thank you. You had mentioned just moments ago that you're in good company with a lot of analysts and economists the world over, concerns about a deep-seated recession for the reasons you've stated. So will all the markets basically be hit, stocks, bonds, and real estate? Does it all come down?
Oh yeah, real estate. This is going to be led by a real estate crisis and a dot-com type bubble bursting. Definitely, we have unfortunately both of them happening at the same time. Most assets will come down. The only thing I'd really get excited about is cash and T-bills. Gold long term is fine. Gold might correct a little bit, but I don't think you want to sell your gold at all. Just buy and hold there. That's going to be part of the new monetary system, whatever that looks like, and I don't know when that's going to occur. And the death of the dollar is a little too, the dollar's not dying. The dollar is a world reserve currency, and I'm going to make a contrarian call. I think we're going to see the dollar start to rally into the midterms because the dollar has a natural 4-year cycle to it. Everybody's bearish the dollar, and when we go into a deep recession, but mind you, we're not going to be the only ones in the recession. This is going to be a global, worldwide recession. There'll be a flight to safety, and the dollar will rise, in my humble opinion.
You're an expert and I'm a student, but when it comes to this level of discussion, but I would agree with you completely. And President Trump, he has stated back prior to the victory of 2024's election, he had stated that when the BRICS were getting all that momentum and the BRICS countries were expanding and everyone's thwarting and working towards dumping that US dollar, well, it impacted, by some measures, it was recently reported, I think the dollar's been down about 10% year to date or something of the sort. But Trump basically said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, the dollar's not going to die. It's not going to go away over my dead body. And you're absolutely right. So, and so hard assets will do well. You mentioned, of course, bullion, gold, and silver are tangible hard assets, but yet real estate being a hard asset will come down, and that's because it's tied to the debt markets. Would that be an accurate and fair assessment?
Well, it's tied to the debt markets, and we overbuilt. We have a supply problem. We overbuilt multifamily housing for the immigrants. That's all going the other way, and we have an affordability problem. We don't have the only way a millennial can buy a home is if the price comes down. That's it. Because we got real estate taxes and insurance and HOAs. If you own a condo, are just way too high. The all-in cost on a monthly payment is well beyond the average. It's cheaper to rent than to buy a home. And when that happens, like it did in 06, 07, it corrects, and it will, the market will be self-correcting. The mechanism of that will be price, and it'll be cheaper to once it's cheaper to buy than it is to rent. The market will recover like it always does. It's just part of a long-term cycle.
Well, thank you. I want to remind our viewers that what Ed mentioned about 20 minutes ago is unbelievable. That 500 billion, correct me if I get the numbers wrong, to about $1 trillion is what it costs the taxpayer, you and me, to house and take care of a variety of different ways the illegal aliens that were pumped into this country by design during the Otto Penn administration. That is just unbelievable. And thank goodness that's coming to an end. They're exporting them out by the plane load. ICE and Tom Holman and so forth are very busy. But the damage has been done. And as you stated, the jobs reports, the numbers are all bogus. And now we're paying the price for that. I want to switch gears, briefly have you comment on two acronyms based on letters that are permeating in social media. And I'd like you to weigh in on the central bank digital currency. We'll start there. I've looked at some statements and some segments of bank contracts, the big five, where, as I understood it, they will convert on some given day the bank, the customer's deposits, and shift it into a CBDC without any consent or control. Would you concur with that statement? Do you know anything about that central bank digital currency?
I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I think that there's already a lot of awareness of this, and there's a lot of legislation in the pipeline working its way through. Certain states have already said no. What I think they're going to do is they're going to do stable coins, and they're going to have J.P. Morgan will have their stable coin. And it's a backdoor way of getting a CBDC. There'll be social controls. It scares me. I don't like digital. I don't like digital money at all. I think as antiquated as paper is, you can't trace paper, and I don't like people knowing what I'm doing.
I hear you on that, and you're absolutely right. That's a warning, folks. They're going to model it off of the Chinese social credit score. They control every, some could call this the mark of the beast. But it looks like that's the central bank digital currency, of which President Trump is well on the record standing firmly against. However, what I call a parallel economy is the one that we're in, the SWIFT system, the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve's money is debt. That whole system is happening and changing within itself. And then we've got talk of a quantum financial system and backing the currency by gold and perhaps other commodities en route ultimately into an encrypted QFS. I think that's unstoppable at this point. And fundamentally, I would agree with you. I'm old school. I like my privacy, and I like, cash is king is an old expression, and as good as gold is an old expression. And I sort of like those things. But technology is moving us into an encrypted QFS of sorts. Any brief comment on that before we move into a closing subject?
I don't want to say it's inevitable. I think we should have a seat at the table and demand one. If they try to implement a system without any of us in the room, meaning the Joe Sixpack, I think we should fight it, whatever it is, because if it takes away our liberties and freedom, I'm not for it.
Understood. Yeah, I hear you. One last thing before we talk about finance technologies, some of the work you're doing and opportunities and reports and things that the public can avail themselves to. But before we go there and close out with that, Japan, it's come across my airwaves, if you will, that our bond and credit problem is going to be connected and linked to some extent with Japan. Do you have any comments about credit, debt, bubble, and problem as it relates to Japan spilling over into the Western world?
Well, Japan has been a source of what's called the yen carry trade for decades. They've had zero interest rate policy, and now they have inflation. They have a demographic problem. And we always knew the global sovereign debt issue would be solved by a currency problem eventually, because the release valve on global sovereign debt is currency. So Japan is facing a currency crisis potentially. They've been plugging holes and putting holes in the dike, and at any moment that could blow up. And we're just, when it happens, I don't know. So that's a black swan event. The real estate crisis we see coming is called a white swan event, because that's something you can see coming, and it's maybe not everyone's saying it, but it's not something that's not foreseeable. If and when Japan blows up, I can't tell you the timing, but it's a time bomb. And when it blows up, it's going to potentially unwind the yen carry trade, which is a giant leverage trade, and it'll be a giant margin call if that happens.
All right, folks, troubled waters ahead without question, as this segment of our show is certainly indicated. And so safe havens, just to reiterate what I think I heard you say, tangible assets like gold and silver would be a buy and hold. Second would be cash, and get off the tracks, because the train is coming, is essentially what we're talking about here. And so the Dow's at 4,600. If you've got profits, you can't take a loss taking your profits, other than the tax man. It's probably wise to heed the call. So gold and silver and cash. Let me ask you about finance technologies, of which you are a founder you're a founder or co-founder?
Founding partner, yeah.
Founding partner, excellent. And so you talk in the introduction the term alternative investments. I'm a big fan of gold and silver tangible, and I've been buying it and owning it. I've sold it a few times along the way since 2001. So cash is king, good as gold. Talk with us about alternative investments, well, back up first. Let's talk about what do you actually do at Finance Technologies? What's available to the public? And talk with us about the fund that you're putting together and the opportunities that might be there for everybody.
Right. Our claim to fame is our vaccine research, which is under the Humanities Project tab. We did that for free, and that's for the world to look at their own leisure. And we have all sorts of investigations into causes of death, excess deaths, what we think is causing the death, how many cancers are on the rise in young people, et cetera. That's all free. We have also resources which are free. We write a lot of free reports. Then we eventually want to raise money for a hedge fund. We haven't started that yet. We're looking for a seed investor. It'll be a global macro alternative hedge fund that's geared off our early cycle indicators and our quantitative black box models. That has yet to be funded, but in the meantime, we're putting out macroeconomic research and charging for those who are interested. We put out a big, giant report at the beginning of the year, Dangers of a Deep Worldwide Recession. We have follow-up real estate packages, and we're going to be coming out with a big China report on the Chinese economy in about 4 weeks. These are very detailed analyses that can be a roadmap, especially for institutional investors, high net worth individuals, family offices, and registered investment advisors. If you're if you can't afford them, just raise some cash in your portfolio and wait. But for those who want to see the details and have to convince others because they're working with others, the research reports are available at financetechnologies.com. I also have a website of my own called eddow.com where you can look me up there as well.
Excellent. Well, that was going to be my closing question. The best way for people to follow you, and it's eddow.com and financetechnologies.com. Finance, of course, with a
and
PH.
Also on X at Dowd Edward. I post a lot on X at Dowd Edward.
That's a great place for people to connect up with you for sure. Are you fairly regular on X? Are you like following the issues and posting regularly, or just?
Oh yeah, I post almost every day. I take weekends off sometimes.
Well, good. We're at war, and we're fighting economic battles as one of the battles within our global defense war, if you want to call it. And but balancing our life is very, very important. I should practice what I'm preaching a little bit more here. But Ed Dow, I want to thank you very much for your keen insights and your expertise in understanding how it all works. And you've raised some serious, if you go back, folks, and listen to this, we're live, but this show gets cut and distributed later. It's worth sharing because you're talking about a global deep recession. for the reasons stated in this broadcast, and that will impact pretty much everybody's life. So this is a period of time for those that may have investable assets to do the right thing and get off the railroad track before the train. It's like the guy's walking down the track with his headset on, listening to his favorite music, and train's coming behind him, and he thinks everything's okay because the Dow's at 46,000. Watch out, folks. Thanks, Ed Dow, very much for the work that you do and the reporting on the COVID. That's very important. And these young cancers, I mean, it's a legal matter at this point, and I can't RFK Jr. and President Trump to really drop the hammer of justice on all those that created this mess for this country and all the souls on this planet. Thanks a lot, Ed Dow, for coming by. Appreciate you and hope you come see us again. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, John.
All right. Well, here's an opportunity and an important announcement, and I'll be right back with an in-depth update of what you need to know. I sat down with SG and I'll be right back.
Your hard-earned assets are under attack and may be in harm's way. Many people are confused, thus concerned about what is going on with the currency, the markets, and the economy. A great change is underway. With the Private Wealth Coach Consult, of which John Michael Chambers discusses in greater detail in Module 10 of the Wealth Coach University, you can break through procrastination as you become informed, empowered, and connected. JMC has created a system whereby you can avail yourself to a team of like-minded professionals to help you navigate this unprecedented minefield and meet privately with John Michael Chambers. The Wealth Coach University was launched based upon years of experience as a successful former financial advisor to help you, Goots, get out of the system.
Hello, this is John Michael Chambers. I retired after nearly 15 years as an independent financial advisor in 2008 to heed a higher calling. My biography can be accessed by visiting wealthcoachuniversity.com. I know what goes on behind the scenes in the world of Wall Street and investments, as well as having my finger on the pulse of the global financial reset of which we are presently engaged. Let's discuss the Wealth Coach Consult. I am not a financial advisor, and I do not give specific financial advice, nor can I assist you in the repositioning of your assets. I will, however, provide answers to your questions to the best of my ability and provide a high-level analysis of you and your situation. At the conclusion of our consult, if one is prepared to take the next step and begin repositioning assets to Goots, G-O-O-T-S, get out of the system, I will make available to you the appropriate individuals in my resource network. In the financial world, these are licensed, seasoned, patriot professionals that can assist in this area and to help you get from where you are to where you need to be as soon as possible, both confidentially and with confidence. Visit wealthcoachuniversity.com. By doing so, you gain access to the 10 free educational video PowerPoint modules. Then schedule your Wealth Coach consult with me today. I do look forward to speaking with you. It's time. All right, SG and has spent the last 15 years immersed in the concepts of espionage warfare, cross-domain insurgency, counterintelligence warfare, cyberspace analysis, signals intelligence, and much more. SG is a highly in-demand digital soldier providing solid analysis of critical events. I sat down with SG this past Sunday, just a few days ago. We were unable to link him up live here today, but this is just a couple of days ago. I sat down with SG, and this is what he had to say. Two. All right. Well, I've got SG and on here at the Global Financial Reset Show. Thanks for being here, SG.
Thank you for having me, John. Good to be here.
All right. This show, we focus entirely on all things related to the economy, and there is so much going on. I've got a list here of things I'd love for you to weigh in on, and I'm going to begin sort of set the stage, which will consolidate a few of these items into one big narrative and then unleash you. What we have here, and I've talked about it before on previous GFR episodes, we have, from what I see the dismantling of the Federal Reserve. I see the dismantling and deconstructing of the IRS. I see both of these things happening at the same time. In fact, the first move on the Fed was back in 2020, I believe. And now things are really ramping up. We hear the president saying things like, with my successful External Revenue Service tariff program, we might not even need the income tax. Then you've got HR 25 sitting there. Folks can visit congress.gov and take a look at what that bill is proposing, which is also the elimination of the IRS as we know it. And I can go on and on, but I'd rather you. So, are we witnessing a complete restructure of the Federal Reserve and the IRS? We'll start there. I've got 4, 5, 6 other related questions on this topic.
Well, it's a very interesting topic to open the call with because, Secretary Bessent just said the quiet part on this particular issue out loud the other day. And he came out, and I forget the network that he was on, but the comments that he made, it might have been an article in the Wall Street Journal. Don't quote me on that. But the comments that he made was essentially that the Federal Reserve needs to have its ability to regulate national fiscal policy, either absorbed by or at the very least advised by and participated with the Department of the Treasury. And so what we've got, in my opinion, John, is just yet another confirmation in the public eye that a significant financial transformation is occurring in real time inside the Western world monetary system and inside Western world governments. If you look at the behavior of all of the Western central banks over the last 6 to 7 years, the importation and the transfer, the movement around, transportation of precious metals, particularly gold, but also palladium, platinum, copper, silver, and others, it's at an all-time high, not only in recent memory, but really since significant record keeping on these national arenas began. And in the United States of America, it's certainly one of the highest acquisition points for these particular resources since the American Civil War. And so as we look at what's happening right now with respect to Secretary Bessent's commentary, with respect to the U.S. banking sector currently carrying nearly $400 billion of unrealized losses just for the first 2 quarters of 2025 alone, I think we have to acknowledge that at some point, whatever pressure is building in the background and whatever movements are being made to respond to that pressure are going to become public knowledge. And I think President Trump is preparing the public not only for a different financial way of life, but to have this broader discussion about what type of financial landscape and what type of governmental restrictions versus allowances and powers we want to actually impart into that new terrain.
Yes, and it's an often used term, parallel economies, but that's aptly stated, and we talk about that a lot on this program because that's what we kind of see going on here. We're in our old system, right, with the SWIFT system, the banking system, the Federal Reserve printing money as debt. We have certainly we have our fair share of taxes with the 80,000 pages of IRS code, and so there's that system, and then we have a competing parallel system, which will turn into a question in a moment that we see going on as we pick up pieces. What are the pieces? XRP, QFS, a digital backed stable coin into the QFS. We're building a new system. Some states already built and been activated and ready for us. So there are parallel economies. We're getting out of the one we're in and moving into the one that's being constructed. Do you care to comment on that? And real quickly, the president, of course, has spoken out against a central bank digital currency, but has not spoken out against digital currencies by and large. That's a lot to jump in on, but you're the guy to do it. Pick it up from here, SG. Parallel economies, where are we heading? What do you see happening?
Well, I think that right there is the conceptualization of the essence of the question, right? If this system is transforming, and we can clearly see that it is, and if this system is beginning to show its weakness and vulnerabilities and collapse under its own weight, and it clearly shows obviously more and more with each passing month that it is, then there is going to be a replacement. There's going to be something new to take its place. And so what do we, the people, really want? What type of capability do we want? How much convenience are we willing to part ways with or sacrifice versus where do we want the convenience more than perhaps some of these different physical world concerns? And I'll leave that for the audience to sort of, take where I'm going with that. I think what we are seeing and what President Trump has highlighted a number of times, but also what the entirety of the American people have almost, unofficially selected, if you will, and I say that sort of tongue in cheek, is this blended ecosystem idea, right? We have a physical world that requires transactional capability at the physical level. We're not going to be able to jump from thousands of years, quite literally, of physical exchange and physical value transaction to something that is wholly intangible. That takes time. Quite literally, it takes generations to phase out historically. How quickly we go through something like that here in the 21st century may be vastly accelerated due to the pace of our life made possible with the information age. But I think with the rise of the parallel ecosystem with respect to this decentralization of currency, and I say that again, sort of tongue in cheek, because you have tokens and coins and stable coins and things like that that are centralized, and you have others that are not centralized, and you have still others that claim to be not centralized, but their mechanisms of control actually highlight more of an administrative centralization in the background. But fundamentally, that entire landscape has now arisen to challenge not just the US dollar in the sense that a physical currency is being challenged for its dominance in the physical world, but to challenge the physical world ecosystems and infrastructures around the entirety of the planet. And we've seen with the development of the BRICS bloc and how rapidly that occurred, that the physical infrastructure is still very well endowed. It is still very much relevant, and it cannot be anything other than a blended ecosystem for the majority of the planet around, the countries around the planet. So with respect to that, I think we have to look at the actions coming from these official government bodies. President Trump establishing a strategic cryptocurrency reserve. A president does not do something like that unless it's going to be fundamentally relevant to the future of the nation, right? A presidential executive order is going to completely impact in a very profound and rapid way the trajectory of anything inside of the American society long into the future. So for that to be published earlier this year, for us to see the SEC case with Ripple and XRP and how that's played out, sort of opening the gateway now for mass application of that particular token at the transactional facilitative level. When we look at BlackRock continuing to tokenize every single asset that they have underneath their entire portfolio, if we think that that's fundamentally in their benefit to do that without them also having total control over the financial apparatus of the physical world, and we talked just a second ago with the other question, how that has also changed in the last 8 years, then I think we're fooling ourselves, because we would have to assume then that there's going to be some sort of massive technocratic betrayal on the part of the Trump administration. And with respect to that particular point, John, and I want to highlight this for the audience out there, I do not believe President Trump is the type of human being who would endanger not only the American people and the future of the nation commercially and economically, but also his own family and his 19-year-old son, 18 or 19-year-old son, for long into the future. I just don't see that coming from the man. I think that there's a lot of transformation that's been occurring very rapidly in 2025. And so we're headed into a place, I think, long term, where there will be the ability to conduct physical world and digital world commerce in the blink of an eye.
Well, I agree with you on your analysis of President Trump's standpoint and the actions he is taking and would take for the best interest of everybody, and he has proven that to us. And so I agree with that. You mentioned strategic reserve. Is that part of what is also known as the sovereign wealth fund? We hear a lot about returning stolen wealth, I'll call it, back to the people from much of the fraudulent things that have been done since 1913, we'll say, and and they have floated. Even Elon Musk in the early days of his Doge time, and the president himself since then. They've floated narratives that sound similar, like, well, you'll be getting a check from us soon. Is a strategic reserve, are you speaking about natural resources? Are you speaking about accumulated dollars, if you will, that are going to come back to the American people? Can you comment on any of that sort of narrative?
Well, absolutely. So there's sort of two separate sides of the same coin, to be punny there with that particular topic. You've got President Trump highlighting earlier this year through presidential memorandum about the strategic cryptocurrency reserve that he wants to establish inside the United States. And so what that's going to do is that's going to be a bellwether standard for certain crypto and digital currency landscapes, right? And it won't obviously, if we look at history, it's not just going to be effective on those currencies that are included in the reserve. The reserve itself and having that standardization of value is going to affect the entirety of whatever blended digital ecosystem begins to rear its head as we go through this process. But then we also have the issue, which you highlighted a second ago, of this thing called a sovereign wealth fund. And I saw this discussed in some news reports. I think it might have been the Gateway Pundit to have published one of the first news reports, ostensibly by an intelligence contractor who had a very deep involvement with the administrative history of the IRS, discussing that there was certain accounts that the IRS kept that were absolutely stacked full of the wealth of the American Republic and the American people over the last 100 or so years. And while I can't personally corroborate that, what I can say is it would make a great deal of sense. And when we look at President Trump's rhetoric, even going back to the campaign trail about eliminating certain taxes entirely, about potentially doing away with the income tax, he's talked a few times about the fiscal policy of the nation being so out of control. And so the way to rebalance that is to just make a ton of money and give that to the American people. He's talked about a quantum leap in the American standard of living. You cannot accomplish anything like that without a significant rebalancing or a significant restoration of what we would call essentially fleeced monies, eaten out of the substance of the American people over the last century. At the same time, I think that we have to keep in mind that as we go forward in this process, we're certainly going to see different reparation points along the way, because the American people will not be satisfied with the overall justice of this entire journey that we're sort of on collectively as a culture, unless we have some sort of remuneration, whether that remuneration is moderate in nature or modest at first and perhaps exceeding going forward, whether that remuneration comes in the form of equalized wages and costs of living tables and taking them more into balance instead of so wildly out of balance, which is where they've been for the last 45 to 50 years in the nation. Regardless of the form it takes, there will have to be the restoration of some of that substance so that there can be healing and unity and purpose again, right? We as human beings want to pursue the things that we want to pursue in life, and oftentimes we make a monetary productivity gain. We trade our life energy and our time for that monetary gain so that we can go and pursue those things that really, get our batteries charged up, or that really, express our passion coming out. And so that's an essential part of healing any individual from a significant trauma. I think we're talking about, the American people learning over the last several years just how deep, dark, and criminal some of the activities of their government have been for a very long time, which in and of itself is a bit traumatizing. And also, with things like the recent death of Mr. Kirk, publicly before the eyes of the world, that in and of itself generates significant emotional and traumatic responses. And so I'm waxing a long time on the topic, but I want to highlight for the folks out there how my thought process works on all of this as I look at it from an umbrella long-term point of view, right? What is America going to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years? It's going to be determined by exactly what we're doing right here, right now. And the economic component is going to fuel, I believe, the spiritual component, and ideally the spiritual expansion to the light and to the positive for the American people.
Well said. Thank you. I've spoken with Juan O'Savin in the past, and I'm paraphrasing. We talked about this 36, $37 trillion of federal debt alone. And what he alluded to was the fact that much of that debt is really not we the people's debt when you get down to the fraudulent aspect of the entire system that created that debt, as well as presidencies that are certainly now with Kash Patel and the DNI, we now have elected officials in those very important positions stating that the election was in fact stolen in 2020, and that's moving forward now. Juan talked about other illegitimate presidencies where their policies and laws and executive orders and so forth may not stand, going back certainly the auto pen presidency, and then the predecessors being Obama, Bush, and perhaps even as far back as Clinton, Juan alluded to. So I guess my question is, with this 36 or 37 trillion, However, this all shakes out, whether it's through bankruptcy courts or other means above my pay grade. Um, if that debt gets moved where it belongs, well, where does it go? It goes in the central bank, the Federal Reserve System, as far as I'm concerned. Do you have any comments about that? Because in one, and I'm oversimplifying it, but in one fell swoop, that debt could be off our balance sheet. Does this sound correct? And one last thing, the president uh, candidate Trump back in 2016 and back in 2020, and we certainly remember the first inauguration where the military came out as a statement behind the president at the inauguration, and the president said, I'm giving you back your country. I'm returning the power back to the people. These weren't sound bites. That's the foundation of his administration. And he is the law and order president, and he's returning us to our constitutional republic. Well, you got to get the Federal Reserve and the IRS out because they're not constitutional, and maybe that debt isn't ours. That's a lot I've unpacked. Do you care to comment on any of that?
Well, you sort of brought it around, I think, to where my comments were going to go on the matter. And, I'm not a financial or legal expert. I can just opine from where I'm at. I do a ton of reading and I love absorbing, new information. I try to understand as best I can. And when I look at what's happening with the U.S. national debt in and of itself, and in particular, I can't help but get my mind off of this situation regarding the federal mortgage fraud that has been apparently under investigation by law enforcement in Tennessee for a number of years, but also has now officially caught the eye of the U.S. DOJ and the federal government. And so it's been just a number of weeks ago that President Trump highlighted Adam Schiff was involved in this. We now have Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook involved in this, allegedly. We have the DA, I forget her name, from, I believe it was New York, involved in it, or maybe it was Fannie Willis from Georgia. I forget which one, but it's one of those two ladies allegedly involved in mortgage fraud and claiming certain things about residences that are simply not allowed, or taking out mortgages against fraudulent assets or debt capital in the background. But when you look at that, and here's where I'm going with this, when you look at where the mortgage debt itself is originated from, mortgage debt is issued by the banks. Well, where do the banks get the permission slip essentially to issue that debt? It comes from the Federal Reserve System. And so as we look at the potential of potentially coordinated fraud across numerous areas of the federal government by individuals involved in the federal government and intersecting with the private financial sector, we may end up reviewing this not just as a bankruptcy situation, not just as a financial law situation, but as a Throckmorton situation, with fraud vitiating everything that occurs after the committance of the fraud itself. And so I look at this, John, and I'm very, very intrigued to see how it's going to play out, because we talked just a second ago in our other question with respect to balancing the balance sheet and restoring some of the substance of the American people. Perhaps we have both sides of the scale here primed to move in the appropriate direction that not only gives us what we want, but also establishes the precedent and the safeguards and the ironclad legal pathways for purposes of our posterity on how we came out from these issues, got a hand on these issues out from underneath the bus on our chest, so to speak, and how we can prevent that from ever occurring again.
Mm-hmm. That leads me to this question. With all this change and battle for currency supremacy clearly still going on, there's two questions here. One, as we progress in setting up this new system, which perhaps would be some form of a digital coin backed by gold and other assets, safeguarded in an encrypted QFS. Okay, that'd be the best way I could describe, I think, where we're heading. When we get there, if and when we get there, in some reasonable facsimile of that, will all nations come aboard? Will there be segments of the world that will not be operating in that? They're hanging on to the dead and dying system. How do you see that playing out in the speculation world here?
Well, it would be speculation on my part, so I want to be just above board and very clear with the audience about that. But I could see something panning out and developing inside the old world international ecosystem of financial exchange that is essentially everything of what you just described a moment ago, but with more nuance and more complexity, and probably geared more to each specific and individual culture and the things that are significant and impactful to them about how they exchange value and do business and how they value their resources and things of that nature. As we look at the world going forward, it's difficult to envision, the type of balance and world peace that I think a great deal of us crave. Sometimes it's difficult to envision because there's a lot going on that has our attention, right? There's a lot that is whipped up around the world. There's a lot that is disinformation, quite frankly. There's a lot that is just innocent misinformation, which sort of clouds the water. And that's sort of, just the natural progression of having a lot of different, organisms in the pool together. But fundamentally, I think that ecosystem, whatever it ends up looking like, when conflict is wound down and balance is truly restored, I think what we would have to have is some semblance of a worldwide compact, perhaps a treaty of some kind, or a convention with a lot of different under treaties signed beneath that convention that all do business with one another in particular ways that require certain things of all participants. So some of those things I could see standardization of value across the international boundary lines, right? Not every country has a ton of gold, but every country has something to offer. So in some form or fashion, an equivalency of exchange would have to be struck in that arrangement. I could see a clause or provision in such a landscape, especially if it was governed by a civil treaty signed by participant nations to an international body or perhaps an international forum of some kind that would require military conflict to be only oriented in a defensive capacity if you wish to continue participating in the broader format of international exchange in this new blended ecosystem that we were talking about just a moment ago. And I could see it playing out where most of the countries, perhaps even a great many countries around the world, are willing to meet those relatively simple conditions in order to do what President Trump told the Arab world just earlier this year: come on board and make money with us instead of making war. And I could also see a landscape shaping up, because this seems to be the essence of some of our physical and personal liberty questions over the last 5 years. I could see an international landscape shaping up where certain countries around the world are actually cut off from a broader international ecosystem and financial system of exchange with one another and trade with one another, because they are not willing to come about to some of those preconditions on the ground, or perhaps there aren't functioning governments in those territories when some of this becomes more physical and more real world. So I know that's a long answer to the question. Again, it's highly speculative, but I try to do a great deal of research on these things. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting as we go forward. We're finding a new balance, not only with one another inside the Western world bloc of nations, not only inside the United States of America, but in all countries around the world.
Thank you. With this, we're at war, and this is one of the battles within the war, and it's the economic battle, and it's quite important. Do you see trouble a little down the line as the war intensifies in these competing parallel systems, in terms of a stock and market bond collapse, a real estate collapse? Do you have concerns about a banking disruption, and so forth? As a result, I mean, all wars have casualties. This isn't just going to be, okay, now we're over here, everybody's okay. Do you suspect or think that we're going to have some hiccups in the markets and in the banking system?
Well, I think that would be the logical conclusion and progression when we look at how something like a transformation of financial lifestyle has to occur inside of a population, right? There's going to be a balancing of the scales, and that automatically means that the side which has been benefiting from the current balance is going to lose that benefit to some degree as the scales begin to rebalance themselves. And so in the loss of that benefit, I could see those pulpits of influence and power really creating obstacles or attempting to obstruct the progress that's occurring. And in fact, John, I would go so far as to say that some of the conflict, perhaps not all, but some of the conflict around the world spawning off right now is as a direct result of seeking to do exactly that. We have the Jackson Hole meeting with Federal, Chairman Powell, or former Chairman Powell. I forget which one it is at this point. It's been a bit of a crazy month for me, but the Jackson Hole meeting in August, where he told the community there, essentially, that we have to prepare for a transformation in the system. In other words, this is not going to be under our centralized control for very much longer, and you all basically need to prepare for it, was the essence of his remarks. And that spawned a number of articles across the financial landscape discussing this idea of, quote unquote, the twilight of the Western central banking system. So we're moving clearly into a new pathway. I think we can look at that and see that, all over the place as we look at the public narrative, everything from Doge to Treasury to, all of the fraud money, the tariffs, all of it, reorienting society in a very rapid fashion. And I think as we go forward, it's going to be a tremendous discussion, between people out there, between all of us out there, on how we want this, to settle and really cement itself for our posterity.
Wow, thanks a lot. I have a couple of more questions. I appreciate your time. Gold uh, is exposing the Federal Reserve's 115 years worth of debasing of the dollar by their debt system. Gold is at all-time highs, almost 3,700 an ounce as we speak. Silver is approaching its former all-time high of 50. They floated, President Trump, certainly Elon Musk a while back, floated the idea about maybe auditing Fort Knox. That kind of came and went. I don't think it's over. We know about the plane loads of gold that was taken back from the tunnels in the Vatican. There's a lot of stories about gold. At the same time, that subject can't be ignored when we're talking about an overhauling of the system and the backing of a currency again. After all, the Constitution stated, back then, that our currencies to be issued and controlled by Congress in weights and measures, meaning the amount of gold and silver to back what's in circulation. Of course, that's over with for a long time. My question is, with all that gold narrative, do you see us backing some sort of a digital stable coin or whatever it may end up being with gold? Do you think there'll be the audit finally? What's your comments about gold? And then where do you see it? And again, in your crystal ball, there's all kinds of forecasts by analysts and economists that take both gold and silver through the roof over the next year or so. What's your take on that?
Well, it's very interesting. I think that the issue of gold and silver and precious metals and commodities, the entirety of the COMEX, itself, is going to be really, really relevant as we go forward with rebalancing the scales in that physical world consideration aspect that we were talking about a little bit earlier, the other side of the coin of that blended digital physical ecosystem. And so when you look at what's happening, with Fort Knox, you asked about Fort Knox just a second ago. I would agree with your sentiments. I don't think that that's over whatsoever. I believe personally, I don't have proof of this from a journalistic standpoint, but I believe personally that audit is likely still ongoing. I believe it was probably begun shortly after the public presentation of this audit actually happening. Everybody wanted more immediate transparency and clarity. But let's be honest, John, if we had a situation going on in Fort Knox or in any other financial institution tied to Fort Knox or the Federal Reserve System that showed higgledy-piggledy in the initial performance of an audit, then we would want to go and flesh that out before we bring that forward to the American people for them to promptly panic or not panic about it. And as we look at that landscape, we could potentially be dealing with things that they need to review as far as records, holdings, inventory, et cetera, going back a number of decades, at least certainly to the Nixon administration. So with respect to the entirety of the precious metal space and the audit of Fort Knox and how that sort of ties into things, I would argue that the precious metal space is going to be the ballast, the surety, if you will, to keep the physical world transactive ecosystem balanced and above board and able to weather whatever difficulty comes from the removal of the fiat cornerstones to the the debt system that exists here in the United States of America, and anything that ties back to affecting that precious metals entity, that precious metal space, and its impact on the broader economic landscape, I think has to be handled extremely delicately and is going to be brought out to the public when and only when it is completely concluded.
Yeah, I would agree. No room for error there on something as widespread as this. Closing questions, Nisara Gasara, the RV, the Iraqi dinar, the Vietnamese currency, the ZIM, that whole narrative that's been going on for 20 years, I might say, in certain circles, go run tomorrow and convert your currencies and you'll be a trillionaire. What do you say about all of that? While there, in my opinion, there are clearly some aspects and some things that are going to happen and are happening. But the notion to me that everyone's just going to become a trillionaire overnight because you're setting up some sort of a entity for society, it defies logic and would create, at least in my layman's view, massive hyperinflation. What happens when you put large amounts of money into the hands of people that have never managed more than 2 cents? I brought it right down to that level of discussion. You can lift us up from there, SG. What's your take on that narrative? And I'll come back with a very pointed question to close this out on the Gasara. But this revaluation of these various currencies that I just stated, clearly things are going on, and I understand that. But is it the pipe dream that everyone's been sitting around waiting for? Should they be waiting? What's your take on that?
Well, I want to remark on the waiting comment. I don't think anyone should be waiting at this point, along in our great awakening journey together for anything. If you feel led and called to be moving in some direction, don't wait for the grass to be greener on the other side of the fence. Don't put off until tomorrow what one can accomplish and be proud of today. That's something that my grandparents used to say to me. With respect to the broader component of the question, however, I think that there's a little bit of nuance here that we should get into, especially regarding revaluations and reorientations, because that's been the essence of what we've talked about so far. I think the idea that we can transform the worldwide economic landscape and take the fiat out and put something of real value in, and not have to revalue some things, I think that sort of in and of itself is ridiculous to consider in that fashion, right? If we're going to change the essence of the system, then some things like Zimbabwe's currency, for example, or other currencies around the world that have been seriously debased over the last 50 to 100 years, they're going to have to be revalued to show a true and honest reflection of whatever the resource and value holdings of that nation relative to the international landscape really truly are. So I think in that regards, you might have some individuals out there that have, perhaps they've been very savvy and they've invested in certain foreign currencies that they believe are going to spike in value as new metrics are applied to the internal valuation of those countries' assets and resources and things that they have to offer. But at the same time, I think we need to be honest with ourselves about the idea of, turning everyone into a millionaire overnight, like you said just a moment ago. I think that, there is always the opportunity for money to be made when one is on the leading edge of understanding about a particular transformation in society. And if we look historically throughout the last 500 years, that is always true, but it's always been those hyper-controlled, very concentrated and centralized and very cross-sectional to the point of like less than 1% of the entirety of the population that has had access to the very initial changeovers and the initial understandings of transformations with things like industrial revolutions or the acquisition of serious national treasures by a government after a conquering of a foreign foe or something along those lines. So for the first time in history, the opposite really is true, or perhaps a more equalized playing field is true. We have the mass public that has understood for a number of years now that things like, certain digital tokens, XRP and others, are very likely to increase in value. We don't know how much precisely, but in that increase, if you have enough quantity of something that you bought for literally tenths of a penny at one point along the way, then you're going to see a significant change, obviously, in your portfolio. I would submit the same principle would underpin any significant commodity or resource coming out of different nations around the world that has been undervalued or had its value maligned. Silver is one of the most manipulated resources on planet Earth. I think that we can all conclude just from its usage and demand at the industrial level, at the electronic intersection point with society, that silver, if properly valued, would be many magnitudes higher than what it is right now. And so individuals that have bought low and choose to hold on when things go high, you have the ability to impart a great deal of some of that wealth and treasure back, that we called it substance earlier in the call, the substance of the American people, imparting it back to them. And as we look at this process, John, I think what this is going to highlight, if I can wax a little philosophical here, is it's going to highlight that classification of individuals, that demographic of peoples out there that Jesus talked about when he addressed, doubting Thomas. Blessed are those who believed, though they had not yet seen, though they had not seen the nail scars, though they had not witnessed what was in my side. Blessed are they for having that faith. And so I think we're seeing a catalyst really where individuals out there have, hopefully done their research and made movements in the financial world at a time where they really had, some faith about the things that could be and that would eventually be. And we may see a great deal of that pan out in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Well said. Thank you. Last question. The Gasara. This, I don't have the data in front of me. I should have had prepared, but I've read it before. This was a bill proposed by an individual many, many, many years ago. And one can go to Wikipedia for that, whatever that may be worth, and read up a bit about it. To the best of my knowledge, it certainly didn't become any bill that is passed. And if I'm wrong, you'll correct me. But there's certainly a lot of talk about Nisara Gasara within the Podcast Patriot movement over the last 10 years, certainly in the last 5 years. And while while I'm familiar with some of the components of Nisara Gasara, it seems that some of those components are actually taking place. But that Nisara Gasara, as it's laid out, do you believe that's actually being enacted? Is it going to be put into law? Is it being done in some other ways? And will all of those components actually happen?
And that is probably a perfect question to close the call off with, because it dovetails right from the question we were talking about just a moment ago. And I want to give the audience a little bit of perspective on this idea of Nisara, Gasara, and the concurrent relief of financial pain, essentially, that lies at the core of that, as well as a return to constitutional law. So there was a document. It was called the National Economic Stabilization and Reform Act. And it was tabled in the U.S. Congress and the House of Representatives, passed out of committee, and then later passed by the House, but never passed in a joint session. And it was headed for a joint session and a number of other things, as on the pathway to legislative passage, as the Clinton administration was going out into the new Bush administration. And so what I understand from what I've been able to research and truly dredge up and corroborate out there for the folks that are listening, is that the document itself never became a true law, but it was headed for that direction, because you still had a significant cross-section of individuals inside the Congress who wanted financial relief and remuneration for themselves. Quite literally, you had selfishness and corruption working in that instance on the behalf of the American people. And from what I understand from a former military contact of mine, the Department of Defense was going to ensure that this law was in fact properly passed if it made itself all of the way through the Congress, up to and including contacting President Clinton. So with respect to that, we had the events of 9/11/2001 that happened supposedly, and this is allegedly, as far as I'm concerned, to deflect from and prevent the announcement that this particular legislation had been taken up by the new Congress and was going to be voted on and sent to the president's desk for consideration. Probably would have met with a veto, of course, but the story was supposed to be broken that morning on the 11th of September, and we know what happened on the 11th of September 2001, about an hour and a half before that broadcast was scheduled. So looking forward from that to today's day and time, as we look at the landscape that has shaped up over the last 7 to 8 years around the world, I would submit to you, John, that what we're seeing, with irrespective of whether or not anything is codified in any singular legislative action, or any sort of legislative stabilization measure that goes into the annals of history as being a Nisara equivalent here in the United States, regardless of the form, we are seeing the principles of that particular purposed and proposed legislation from a number of decades ago acted out and instilled in the American population and slowly back into the American governmental and institutional apparatuses right before our very eyes in real time. We have the restoration of constitutional law happening with the removal of a ton of judges around the country with respect to the immigration obstruction and the committance of federal crimes and felonies by actors of the judiciary. We have a massive amount of tax relief promised by the Trump administration and passed in the one big beautiful bill. We have a financial infrastructure that is being built out, going all the way back to the 2018 Quantum Act, that is going to allow for much greater intersectory power from a law enforcement standpoint when you're talking about moving money around for purposes of criminality or significantly malign behavior that's going to endanger society. We have all of these different things, the various relief and payments and returns and refunds and checks and things that we've seen rumors about coming over the last number of months. I saw another article or I think it was an article today that came out discussing this idea that there was going to be a refund to certain individuals. Most of them would be small business individuals and owners who had paid overinflated sales tax, essentially unnecessary and unreasonable sales tax. So some sort of a refund was coming from Treasury to them, and to expect that in the coming weeks. So we're seeing the landscape reoriented right before our very eyes. And as we watch that process, continue to blossom and flower both in the United States and around the world, I would submit to you in the audience, John, that we don't need something as singular and as attention grabbing and dramatic as a massive single piece of legislation outlining a completely new way of life. It may be better to do this in a more codified standpoint over many different areas of what we would call the pillars of our society to ensure that it functions as a beneficial apparatus to the whole going forward for our posterity.
Well said again. I think that's exactly what's happening. And one thing we do know for sure is great changes underway on many areas, but we're discussing the economy and aspects related right now. Great changes underway from everything our audience has been listening to here and following over these months and years, really, but certainly as of recent. The trajectory is good. It's good news for us. We're not used to good news. As President kept saying, you're going to be winning so much and so forth. Folks, we're moving in the right direction. We're taking the shackles off. We're busting free from the matrix of controlled thought and the boots of tyranny on our neck via the debased fiat currency system and so forth. While from some aspects, this is the closing statements here, SG, from some aspects, I see this as a big barge in the big ocean, and it takes a long time to turn that thing around and move it swiftly in the other direction. From some perspectives, I see this as a slow boat move. From other perspectives, I see things accelerating rather quickly. Close out from that standpoint, if you will, SG, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I think my closing on those comments would be sort of reflective of what you just said, right? If we're going to acknowledge the gravity of what it would require to invert and reorient the entirety of the international monetary landscape to be fair, just, and equitable in an agreeable and informed consent sort of capacity across international boundary lines, that is a Leviathan undertaking if there ever were one. And so as we look at the things that are playing out inside the U.S. trade landscape, especially as we look at the things that are playing out inside the U.S. Treasury bond market worldwide, as we look at the continued economic cooperatives coming into Eurasia and Africa, financed by the Chinese, essentially, almost exclusively by the Chinese and the Russians, as we look at the introduction of a BRICS stablecoin, essentially a beta run that was proposed by Moscow and is scheduled to begin anytime in the coming months going into 2026. I think we have to acknowledge that this is a whole of humanity undertaking if we're going to break away from a control system that is literally 1,000+ years old in its current form and has benefited less than 0.01% of the entirety of the American population, right? As we look at and the entirety of the world population by extension, as we look at the Federal Reserve System, as we look at the central banking empires that have taken over more than 200 countries in the last 100 to 150, 200 years, depending on whatever timeline you want to apply to it. I think we can say that that entire landscape took a long time to get into place. It's going to take a little bit of time to reorient and change, and we're moving, I think, as rapidly as we can move, given where we're at as a society on many other things, which we're finally willing to have those philosophical and intellectual discourses about.
All right. Well, thank you. SG, what's the best way for people to follow your body of work and the interviews and such that you do on your own, or and the interviews where you are a guest? What's the best way that people connect up with you?
Well, I have four places I can be followed online for the video content that I produce, the audio and video content. I'm on Rumble at rumble.com/user/Q News Patriot. I'm not on Rumble by the name SG Anon. I can be found on Truth X and Telegram for general social media outreach and interaction with the public. My handle on Truth Social is real REAL SG Anon with a red check mark. I'm at the handle THEQ News Patriot with a blue check mark on X, and I can be found on Telegram at t.me/real REAL Q News Patriot. It's always a pleasure, John, and I appreciate you having me here. I look forward to coming back.
Well, there you have it. This has been a very, very informative and very important broadcast, beginning with the commentary and analysis from Ed Dow, and as we just closed out, a lengthy discussion with SG and on. I'm very big on action. Action changes things, and we can clearly see things are changing. We are in what I've always called the danger zone right now, and I think our two guests, particularly Ed Dow, have laid that out for us. And so I'm launching in October. I don't know when just yet. Take some time working with my tech support team and putting together a webinar workshop that will be once a week, probably about 30 minutes each week. A hands-on webinar workshop to help us to get out of the system. In the meantime, please visit wealthcoachuniversity.com. 10 free educational PowerPoint modules are there. Get started there. Those that do not want to wait, you want to fast track it, you want to get your gold and silver, jmcgenesismetals.com. Ask for Bill Armour. He'll take care of you. Those that are interested in a wealth coach consult with me, you go to wealthcoachuniversity.com. I prefer you listen to the modules first and then gain access to speaking with me. I'm speaking to one or two people a week right now, and my time is limited, so there's not that many appointment slots available, but I do look forward to helping you. And you can learn all about that by visiting the modules. So there you have it, folks. Saving America is not a spectator sport. Neither is protecting and preserving your hard-earned assets. This requires knowledge and requires action. So again, visit wealthcoachuniversity.com and avail yourself to the modules that are there. And joining me next week on the Global Financial Reset is Juano Savin and the director of Genesis Gold Capital, Bill Armour. Both gold and silver are rising in value, real value. And when the Fed lowers rates, which is beginning to occur, this will result in a catapult in the shiny metals growth. Gold will play a major role in securing the US dollar again and the new stable digital currency in the QFS that we are moving towards. And so I absolutely encourage you, those with investable assets, either inside or outside of your IRA or 401k, to buy gold, buy silver, buy now, but buyer beware. You could check out Understanding Precious Metals module in the Wealth Coach University to understand what I mean by that statement. This gets addressed to those that have already acquired metals and those that are looking to acquire metals. Avoid the dangers by visiting the free modules. And click on jmcgenesismetals.com, ask for Bill Armour, and tell him I sent you for VIP expert service and trusted advice. I think that's pretty much going to be a wrap. If you'd like to talk with me, you can send me an email. I check this email once a week. I try and get back to everyone. It's John, John, John at jmcbroadcasting.com. I'm happy to talk with you. This is the dawning of the golden age, and this is John Michael Chambers speaking with his voice. Please do speak with your voice. Please stay safe. Check out all our other broadcasts at jmcbroadcasting.com with our military and intelligence wartime correspondents, and our new show coming out in a couple of weeks, Eyes on Gitmo, with Juano Savin, Matt Meck, and General Holt. That's a wrap for today. Thank you for listening and following and sharing our work. May God be with you.